After we got our divorce, I just kept praying for God to get me out from behind the bar. But somehow it just seemed like He just wanted me there. I tried doing it on my own. I took a job driving a food truck for a food bank. It felt great. It felt like I was doing God's work. I'd take truckloads of food and pass it out to hungry people all around the area. I felt like the Holy Spirit was in that truck with me every day. I met a lot of drunks and crack addicts needing food. They'd be anxious to see me and wanted to talk with me. Then the food bank's insurance company discovered my past driving history. Even though it had now been years since any citations had been given to me, they wouldn't insure the trucks with me as a driver. So the food bank put me in charge of the warehouse inventory. A Christian woman who worked there wanted that position and fabricated a story to get me fired. I was out of work and in need of food myself. The people at the food stamp office said they could only recommend getting assistance at the food bank. I ran into the guy who replaced me as a driver for the bank. He gave me his route schedule and told me to meet him there on Saturday, and he'd make sure I got some food because the food bank refused to help me. That Saturday, I stood in the same line of people I used to help. Many of them remembered me. They would take things out of their own boxes and slip them into mine. This truck driver, who had a drinking problem, told me about a church that helped him pay some bills. He helped me get an appointment to talk to them. They got me caught up on my bills. A young pastor there was moved by a tape of one of my leads from AA. I attended church there a few times while I was unemployed. Then I had to accept a bartending job at a strip joint. The day bartender, who also happened to be the person to serve me my last drink, well, she helped me get that job. It was a very rough bar. Lots of crack addicts, drunks, cokeheads. One day when the place was pretty empty, I walked by a dancer sitting in a dimly lit corner by herself. She was reading a devotion book called Our Daily Bread. I told her I read that every morning. She said a friend of hers gives it to her when she's done with it. We talked for a while, and I offered to bring her an up-to-date copy that has a mail-in card inside. They could send her a new up-to-date issue every quarter. She said she'd like that, and told me she wished she could stop dancing. The next day I worked, I gave her that copy. 2 weeks later, my boss said that same dancer quit. She gathered all her dance clothes from her locker, passed them around to the other dancers. He laughed and said, "She found religion." I just smiled. I worked there for a little over a year. During that time, I became friends with quite a number of dancers. They'd talk with me about their addictions and abusive relationships. Some would even come over to my apartment as an escape. My place started to become a safe haven for several of them. I can recall someone pounding on my door at 3 or 4 in the morning. Upon opening the door, there stood a young woman in a miniskirt. She was beat up, with blood running down the inside of her legs. She had nowhere else she could go. She had an open warrant, so she couldn't go to the police to report the rape, and couldn't go to the hospital with an open warrant. I tried to help her related to a crack addiction she had suffered with for years. It was a long process for her. Shoot, we're still good friends even now. I was finally able to go back to my old bartending job that I had left. It was around this time frame when another fellow and I started to conduct the AA meeting at a county work release facility. We attended this meeting every week for well over a year. A work release program has one of two kinds of inmates in it. One is inmates who are given one last chance before being incarcerated in a full-tail penitentiary. The other is those inmates who are now preparing for release from a penitentiary. To conduct this meeting, we were required to sign in at the guard's desk. Afterwards, we would walk down this corridor and pass through this really securely locked iron door. The meeting had to be conducted in a conference room that was in the midst of the inmates' living quarters. Once in there, we were basically out of the protection of the guards. Hearing that iron door slam shut and lock after we passed through would always unnerve me. I was being locked up again. Insanely enough, this time voluntarily. Before we would go into the facility, we would sit in the car, hold each other's hand, and pray for the Holy Spirit to take charge of us and the meeting. This experience of God's powers was so intense. I've never been able to explain the influence of it to anyone who had not experienced it. Watching God work on human beings possessed by bitterness, and yet such a strong need of human beings for hope. Human beings brought down to powerlessness. Most of them greatly appreciated the meetings. I'd always float on a cloud after experiencing one of those meetings. Once after we went back to the guard's desk to sign out, the lieutenant in charge of the facility asked if he could talk to us. He was never there at night before when we would go. We'd been conducting this meeting a little over a year at this time. He took us into a private small conference room across from the guard's desk. He explained this room was used when an inmate was about to be released. He said a condition of being released was that they are required to complete an evaluation questionnaire. This obtained inmate opinion on each of the various classes they were required to attend. They have the option of selecting 6 of about 10 classes of various subject matters. One is religion, one is AA, and then there are about 8 more they can choose from. He went on to tell us he had been the lieutenant of this facility for about, I think he said 8 years. After 8 years, the approval rating of each of the classes has remained consistently the same. It's never changed. It's always ranged around 12 to 15% approval. No one class has ever been any different from any other. Until this last year. All other classes remain the same as they always have. The only one that's changed is the AA class of this past year. Then he said the approval rating jumped to 81%. I personally feel like I have witnessed many of God's miracles during my life of recovery. It makes no sense to me why God wanted to educate a pathetic drunk like me. God uses our weaknesses for His strength. He's assured me if I use these tools of recovery to sustain a life of sobriety and remain in conscious contact with Him, His grace will surround my life. If there's any question in anyone's mind if the 12-step program of recovery works, if there's any message I can give anyone, this program does work, if you work it. I had held a bottle in my hand 40 hours a week for 7 years since my last drink, and I don't even have a desire to touch it today. I didn't do that. That's not Dean. That's what God and the 12 steps have given me. Today, I'm not afraid of people. I'm not afraid to talk to women anymore. I'm not afraid to give a man a hug. I'm still an alcoholic, but it's now been over 11 years since my obsessive desire for alcohol was removed by God's grace. For now, this is the story of the AA bartender.